Right, it is the 27th day of the month of September. It's actually the final week of this month, and it's been a very eventful week and, of course, eventful day. I have a few friends who've been saying that this week has really rushed so fast. It's Wednesday already, and of course, I know, like me, many of us always can't wait for Wednesday to come, for us to have this particular conversation and this conversation that we always have right here on this amazing program called The Summit. We are in session. My name, as always, is Eugene Anangwe. We're not alone. We have guests who are joining us from far and wide. Remember, this is a Pan-African show where we have Pan-African conversations that matter to you. We scale the heights to bring you those guests that are able to dissect or digest some of that particular conversation. And tonight on the program, we have guests who are joining us all the way from Uganda. We have Dr. Sarah, who's joining us on the show, not for the first time, but for the second time. She's called Dr. Sarah Virete. She's the chairperson, East and Horn of Africa Election Observer Network. She's joining us all the way from Uganda. Also, we'll be getting none other than Samson Cherengei, who's the senator of Nandi County in Kenya. And of course, when you talk about Nandi County, we are talking about the county where the champions come from. Champions when it comes to athletics. We know of Kipchoge Keino. He comes from that particular county. I'll be talking about the guests who are here with us in studio. But before we do that, let's definitely look into what we are going to be discussing tonight on the program. If you are a social media ardent, I am particularly sure, more than 100%, that you're already aware of what we'll be talking about right here on the program tonight. We are going to be looking at the question of democracy that works. And the question we're going to be asking ourselves is it time to rethink the model for Africa? What should or would it look like? Democracy, that's the question we're asking ourselves tonight on the program. We'll definitely talk about consensus politics versus confrontational politics as far as other jurisdictions are concerned. We'll also look at power sharing models versus winner takes all, and the pros and cons as far as democracy is concerned. And of course, we'll look at the question of the term limits. What should it be about when you talk about term limits? Is it about the number of years that a leader serves, or is it about the popularity, the vision of that particular leader? How should term limits look like? Of course, that is why we also have Senator Cherengei, who's actually in Kenya. He is definitely proposing a mandate change in terms of the term limits for the president in Kenya, among other proposals, including the issue of changing from 5 years to 7 years. That is in Kenya. That is the proposal that he has made, and he'll be sharing more about that right here on the program. Remember, this particular program is coming to you live and direct. We are live on our social media platforms, and on YouTube, you can definitely jump there. I can see Kaitare Fred, who is saying this is really interesting show. I want you to jump on that particular space and talk to us from where you are. Let me read some of the thoughts that have come through. Fidel on X says the discussion will be great. I can't miss it. Thank you so much for joining us. Willie Rukundo says interesting topic, but Africa is made up of more than 50 countries with different administrative, historical and cultural backgrounds. Still, in Africa, you can't have one suits fits all concept, because countries should have political dispensations based on their cultural history. We'll be able to look into that as well right here on the program. Let's kick this particular conversation by welcoming formally our guests who are joining us for this conversation. I'll start off right here in studio. We have Dr. Frank Habineza. He's the party leader, the Democratic Green Party of Rwanda. Thank you for making time.
Thank you very much
for joining us. Also with us is none other than Dr. Alphonse Murefu, making a premiere on the summit. He's a senior lecturer, School of Law at the University of Rwanda. Thank you for making time on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Also with us, like I said earlier on, we have Dr. Sarah Virete, who's the chairperson, the East and Horn of Africa Election Observer Network. She's joining us from Uganda. And I'm not sure if you already have Samson Cherengei. He's the senator of Nandi County in Kenya. And of course, he'll be joining us right here on the program to share more on his thoughts on this particular conversation. I want us to kick off this conversation from right here, first of all, here in studio. And Dr. Habineza, I want to start with you because you lead a party that has the word democracy. And the word democracy is actually featured prominently in the party that you lead.
Yeah.
And so I want us to first understand from where you sit, what does democracy look like? How should it look like? What are the pillars of democracy? How do you say that a country is considered democratic or not democratic?
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for, once again, to invite us on this show. Well, democracy, as everyone knows, that is the rule of the people for the people. And people say it comes from the Greek words, demos and what. So basically, without going into those further details, when they say will of the people for the people, that people choose their leaders, and then they hold their leaders accountable. And then the leaders work for the people as they have promised. And if they fail, then the people have a right to remove them from office and put others. So that would call democracy. But it's not that only. The pillars, what you mentioned, like pillars, to have what you call democracy, there has to be freedoms, which are granted in the Constitution, like the freedom of speech, that everyone has the right to air out his opinion, as we call it freedom of expression as well. There's also freedom of the media, that lets the journalists, the media, to work properly, professionally, without threatening them. The freedom of association. People are allowed to associate, to have the associations, to meet in political parties, and you can put some limitations, but they have that freedom. So there are fundamental freedoms, but also there's biggest freedom, there's freedom, the right to life.
Right to life.
Yeah, so that you should make sure that people are not killed, people are protected. So to have a democracy, the country must be protected. So there are other institutions that need to be in place. To have that democracy function, you must have a stable security system, an army, have a state boundaries, a police, and so on. To have laws in place that secure those people. But for us, we go deep into like right to water. That's like if you don't have water, you will not live. And then right to a clean environment. Those are new rights which are coming up, but which are internationally recognized. And then, of course, the biggest thing, people must have food. Because after all those things, with a good army, with a good what, if you don't have food on the table,
not food secure, then
there is no democracy. So I mean, I'm just trying to put it in the simple terms. So once you have all that in place, people are free to choose their leaders. They can get the food. They can be secure. They can go to hospitals. They can go to schools. That's a full functioning democracy.
Right. Interesting. Dr. Mrefu, I want to bring you here because for quite some time, when the continent is being put on the pedestal of whether it is democratic or not, or countries within the continent, whether they're democratic or not, usually the focal point is mostly elections or electoral processes. Are those that do that being simplistic? Because from what Dr. Habineza mentions, it looks like it's more than just the election.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you're making a good point. Democracy is appealing not because of its name. It is appealing because of its content. And in its content, you talk of transparency, you talk of accountability, you talk of rule of law, you talk of all those things that put together are considered as principles of democracy. But democracy is a form of governance. And by understanding governance is the ability of the government to provide the services and maintain law and order. So the challenge, I think, even when people talk about why is it a topic today or why is it a topic in Africa, is that since independence, African leaders have not been able to deliver in terms of governance. There are some governance gaps. In terms of development, there's poverty. When we claim to be the most richest continent in the world, we still have not been able to deal with these basic needs that concerns the well-being, that would improve the well-being of Africans. And I think the question we should be asking ourselves is why is it that African leaders, with some countries having changed their leadership several times, have not been able to deliver on those content of governance. And I think it cannot be true that we would say that African leaders are all bad people. And I think we cannot also say that they are ignorant people, that the rest of us are good, are well-intentioned, because these African leaders come from us. So to make that judgment, we would impliedly be saying that Africans are bad people,
and there's no
they are
democracy
bad
in the
intentioned,
yes.
and I think we need to be going deeper and ask ourselves, why is it that African leadership has failed? And I think that question would lead us to know then what is it that has not been done correctly that would bring those things that we expect from good leadership.
Interesting that you mentioned that, and you bring in key points that I want to bring Dr. Sarah on. You mentioned the fact that you know, it should not just be by name, but also context. But of course, it's also a form of governance. And I want to bring in Dr. Sarah. Dr. Sarah, when you are actually sitting within the hat that you wear on election observation, because most of the time the pedestal or the yardstick is mostly the electoral processes. If an electoral process has not gone well, then that has always been what is a determinant on whether a country is democratic or not. Do you feel that has been a simplistic way of looking at things? But also, Dr. Murefu says that it's a form of governance. Form of governance according to who? Do you feel that countries are at liberty to choose how they form their government or how their governance is structured? Because we're asking ourselves tonight, is it time to rethink a model for Africa when it comes to democracy? Has there been one that we've been using as a continent that we feel we need to rethink, or you feel otherwise? Dr. Sarah.
Thank you, and fellow panelists. There is a growing thought that democracy has failed in Africa, and maybe we need to find something else, that this democracy is imported, is foreign, and we have failed to grasp it. I don't share that view, although the thinking is not largely unfounded. Many people have been disappointed with the form of democracy that we use today, and this is the global democracy standard. When it comes to elections, many people have lost trust in elections because of the nature or because of the way they are conducted. People feel that their will does not count in elections. The choice of the people as to who should govern them is usually contested, and people feel like this process is not for them, it does not represent them. The other reason there is such a growing thought is lack of trust because of lack of accountable leadership in Africa. Corruption, lack of accountability has eroded the trust of the people in institutions, and that has not spared the elections either. When it comes to the actual democracy, should we then rethink? Africa has largely had adaptive democracy.
Yes.
In Uganda, we have what is known as the decentralization system. Kenya has devolution. And many other countries have tried to create a hybrid of democratic systems that suit their political and cultural contexts and are able to deliver services to the people. So if we have had this adaptive democracy and we still think that democracy is not working, I think the question should then be, where is the problem? Democracy thrives on three key principles. The first principle is rule of law. The second is independent and efficient institutions. And the third one is active citizenry that are able to hold their leaders accountable and enforce that social contract between the leadership and the led. So in most countries, you find that the citizens are not largely informed and are unable to exercise the necessary transparency and accountable demands on the people.
Yeah.
Like old adage goes, a community of sheep can only be led by hyenas. So when you have a large population of Africans that are not informed, that are not actively participating in their governance, that are not following the transparency questions and holding their leaders to account, then the arm of democracy, the one stool of democracy breaks away. Because democracy is about the people, like the first panelist defined.
Yeah.
Democracy is the government of the people, for the people, and by the people.
Yeah.
So our question should be, where are these people?
Where are these people?
And how are they participating in their democracy? And unless we answer that question, then we shall keep saying that the democracy has failed in Africa, when it's us that have failed to create an enabling environment for the people to fully participate in their governance.
Interesting, Dr. Sarah. I want you to hold your thought on that, and let me bring in the Senator Samson Cherengei in Kenya. Senator, you are within the ruling party that actually enjoys, based on the last election in Kenya, in terms of popularity. And Dr. Sarah asked the question, where are the people? And most of the time she says it's the people who cannot be able to, push for delivery from their governments, or the ones that they elect to office. Now, mostly what we've seen in most of our electoral processes, the party that wins usually has galvanized the population to be able to rally support, and whether this support comes from various reasons, at what point then does these people who've supported you and voted for you and made you the leaders or put you to government, at what point do they now start checking and balancing you? Because it might look like a conflict of interest. You cannot probably bite the finger that is feeding you because we put you to power. How do they now turn around to do these checks and balances? Because that is what we rarely see in most cases.
And it is an honor to be part of tonight's conversation all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. One thing, I am excited to be part of this discussion about the democracy in Africa. Number two, I agree that democracy is for the people, by the people, and it is the people who decide on many aspects. And I want to say democracy in Africa is different from democracy in other, because ours is adaptive democracy. And I always believe that democracy in Africa should be different from the rest of the world, because the way Africa used to be governed during and after colonial period was totally different from the way it is being governed in other countries. I've seen people comparisons saying the established democracies like America, which we like to equate here in Africa, it should be equated with Kenya, for example, which is only 60 years in terms of that has received the self-rule from colonially. So I think what I can say, where the people are, people will always, my brother, it's about interests. It's about people will vote to be part of the national cake. Here in Kenya, for example, what we have is where you ask where the people are, where the interest is.
Yeah.
When they know political formation or a political party will win power, that is where many people will vote, because in Africa we have attached too much premium on the highest office in the land, and that is the presidency.
Yeah.
Where people get presidency to resource allocation. And when you come to politics, it's always who will sit on that table of the national cake. And the biggest challenge has been the deficit of resources and development across many countries in Africa.
Yeah.
And I think another issue, one of my panelist colleagues have alluded to the fact that the electoral process is where we get into power. Kenya had elections in last year, and the current president and the ruling party where I am, led by Dr. William Ruto, is the current president of Kenya, is because we have these challenges of not trusting our electoral processes. It is not about the electoral processes, it's about the deficit of trust we have in many countries about the election process. And that is why, even in Kenya, we have the biggest challenge where almost millions and millions of young people did not participate in elections, because the electoral process has eroded that trust, has disillusioned many of the votes and the voters.
Yeah.
So from where I think when you ask where the people are, the people know where the interest of politics is about the interest. And that is why the people in power always want to play around with the interest of the people.
Right. Senator Cherengei, Senator of Nandi County in Kenya, I want to come back to you just in a bit, because we still need to be able to look at the issue of power sharing, consensus politics versus confrontational. And on this one, I want to bring in Dr. Habineza. Dr. Frank, in Rwanda, we have consensus-based politics in this particular country. And in many cases, this has been termed or has caused Rwanda to have what some people have tagged the country as not competitive politics. And they've used that to label Rwanda as undemocratic. The political space is not there because there's no competitive politics. And when you sit here today as a member of the opposition, or a party that is in the opposition, and also a presidential candidate in the previous election here in Rwanda, do you feel that there is any sense in that kind of a statement, especially when you're looking at consensus politics versus confrontational politics in that case?
Well, I would say that the democracy is universal, and every country has signed on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Geneva Convention, the African Charter on Human Rights and People's Rights and Democracy. I forgot the terminologies, but even Rwanda is a signatory to that. So I think we all believe into these concepts, but specifically for the Rwandan case, when people they were drafting the Constitution, the drafters of the Constitution, when they were drafting the Constitution, they looked at the past of Rwanda, actually the recent history of Rwanda, which was characterized by mass violence and the highest crimes of humanity, which included genocide against the Tutsis. So these are not the small things. These are things which are very big in our history. People said, what can we do in order to have a sustainable future, to have a country which will not go back into the past? And people were looking at the causes. What were the real causes? There were many causes, but some of the causes of the catastrophes we had was issues of deficit of democracy, whereby there was one-party state for over 30 years. And that one-party state, there was one party what takes it all. And one particular group of people taking all the positions of government in the army, public administration, even all the civil services. And then people said, when we drafted this constitution, we need to find a different model that whereby we have issue of power sharing into practice, so that people should not be fighting for these positions. Because, sorry to say, I'm a member of parliament, but we politicians, we also fight about positions. So leave alone other things, but politicians also fight about positions all over the world. So it's if politicians are fighting about positions, it's also good that there's that share of that national cake, as the senator was saying. How can we share this national cake? It's not small, but it can be shared. So this was the concept in the constitutional formulation. So we have Article 10 of the Rwandan Constitution, they quote line 6 or alinea 6, which talks about that in the fundamental principles of the Constitution, that we as Rwandans agree of doing our politics with a spirit of dialogue and consensus. Maybe if you want to me, I can read it specifically. But the main points there is dialogue and consensus. So why people chose that? Because we have been in the confrontational politics before, where political parties were fighting on the streets, killing each other, and people, I mean, this was happening not long ago, about 25 or 26 years ago. Okay, no, maybe, let's say 30 years ago. And this was evident here in the streets of Kigali in the 90s. So people say, we need to see something else. And then people agreed that, yes, we can disagree. But yet, can we find a place of agreement? That's what we call consensus. So political parties who are here, are here. We have 11 political parties who have different programs. I have been to the elections. I think you had a chance to interview me in the last presidential elections. We had a different manifesto from the RPF's manifesto. But we were able to give our views, our positions, in a peaceful manner, not to abuse, using abusive language. Like maybe other colleagues in other countries who like to use abusive languages, confessional, they think that's democracy, but it's not here democracy. But you have to also give your points, but with respect. And I think we were able to pass through that election peacefully, without being arrested or being killed or whatever, because we were trying to abide by that policy of dialogue and consensus. So when people see this, they think maybe we are stupid or we are not good enough or whatever. But it's not true. We have a recent history of mass violence and the highest crimes of humanity, which we don't want to go back to. So in Parliament, we do debate in Parliament, we give our views. views, different views, and we have even impacted change in this country. We have been able to influence change in policy, in the government. The Green Party is able to change some policies because we can be able to articulate our points peacefully, in a peaceful manner, and they are able, not confrontationally, and they understand there's nothing good in using abusive languages, in trying to fight. Why should I go fighting people, fighting Dr. Mlefo, go and fight on the street? No one will listen to me. And I have some other examples from other countries.
Correct.
If you use dialogue, and because you can achieve more than when if you go on fighting. So I don't think that we don't have, it's not lack of democracy, but it's the way we have chosen. As I mentioned, that we have to follow international principles, because all the international principles are also enshrined into our constitution.
Right.
Yeah.
Dr. Mrefu, that's a very interesting point that Dr. Abineza brings on board. When there's no confrontational politics, a lot of those who say they are, overseers of human rights, they would say that there is a stifling of the political space, and so there's no democracy in those countries. We're trying to look at the pros and cons of consensus politics versus what Dr. Abineza just says here, confrontational. What would be the pros and cons in having such a model that does not involve competitive, in their words, of those who actually point back and say that there's no democracy because there's no competitive politics in that country?
I think sometimes there is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding in the sense that the common terminologies maybe to use is consensus versus majoritarian, where majoritarian is when the winner takes all, where the executive powers are concentrated in the hands of one party.
Yeah.
And in a consensus democracy, there is the desire for power sharing.
Yeah.
And our constitution is very clear. Even if you are the majority leader, the head of the state that has the majority in the parliament, you cannot have more than 50% of the cabinet members from your party. And then something very fundamental, I think Dr. Frank will agree with me on this, is the use of proportional representation, which allows small parties also to be in parliament. In majoritarian systems, you will not find smaller parties in parliament, because it will be very difficult. If you get, for example, 10%, you might get 10% national, but you will not get them in parliament because you have not been able to win in a particular constituency. So this is what allows a consensus democracy to be much more peaceful. And you will find it in countries in Europe, for example, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and very recently in UK, which was largely majoritarian, but the recent elections, because there were no party that won the majority, then they were forced to go into consensus after the failure to get the majority. So in these other countries where they are also encourage winner takes all, when it fails, they go into consensus, because otherwise the state would be ungovernable. And you need to create coalitions to be able to have a majority to be able to win. And even if you are the leader at the top as the head of state, you will also need to have the coalitions in the parliament to be able to pass the programs that you will have. So consensus will always be very important.
It's very important.
But I wanted to mention something about
just real quick, so we bring in
on the issue of legitimacy. The problem African leadership has is the requirement of double legitimacy. Legitimacy in the sense that we always need the consent of people to be governed, to see that the government in place is the right government to be governing. For Africans, and especially I say this given the criticisms that you have been saying, is that it is not the legitimacy of the governed, of the citizens. It is also the legitimacy, the external legitimacy. And sometimes external legitimacy might conflict with internal legitimacy. And sometimes which is often the case, external legitimacy might override internal legitimacy. And that's the problem I think people need to think about. And then the deficit that are related to diversity of African countries.
We'll come to that. I'll come to you too, Dr. Ebenezer, but I want to hear from Senator here because Senator Cherengei, you know, in Kenya, I mean, it's been in the glare of the cameras and the media, what has happened in terms. Senator Cherengei, if you're with us, I wanted just to get your thoughts on, is Senator there, please? Senator, all right. We'll come to Senator if we get him back, if we get a hold of him. Dr. Sarah, just real quick, maybe your thoughts on this, because on that issue of internal legitimacy and external legitimacy, and sometimes external legitimacy overriding the internal legitimacy, we've seen a lot of that either openly or sometimes, you know, by way of decoy. And we've seen sometimes some of the external pressure coming into the local politics and sometimes overriding, or sometimes the leaders locally standing firm and insisting that we know what we want and we'll stick to our guns. Talk to us a bit about how this is dangerous for the continent, as far as the continent charting its own way and path as far as democracy is concerned.
You know, this situation arises where you have failure of pillars of democracy in the country. If a country undermines its own pillars, like institutions of the state, like processes of determining leaders, like the participation of the people, for example, in countries where you have shrinking or closing civic space, the people are not free to participate. So as you close the participation of the people in their democracy, you open routes for the external to come in. And this is a danger of authoritarian leadership in the continent, or rising authoritarianism in the continent. So we need to understand that when you block democracy, then you open doors for external interference and then external, you know, legitimacy, as Dr. Mref has mentioned. But on the matters of, you know, the need for constructive engagement in a country, and the need to strike a balance depending on prevailing issues, an environment that leads to consensus is largely lacking in most of our countries. You find that everybody has a winner-take-all mentality. A winner-take-all mentality creates polarization. It creates dictatorship of the majority. It creates, you know, less inclusivity. Because you have somebody who says we are in power, instead of saying the majority have their way and the minority should have their say, you find that even the minority don't have a say in some of these countries, where you find issues of internal and external legitimacy. So we need to know that every action in democracy has a consequence. And the purpose is to create checks and balances, create an enabling environment that enables inclusivity, compromise, social cohesion, and protection of minority rights. So when you lose this, then you open a Pandora's box for anybody to participate, and you find that even you lose charge of those countries.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Sarah. I'm told Senator is back. Senator, I wanted to read your thoughts from what we've heard from the three panelists, especially on the issue of consensus, model of politics, power sharing. These are things that we've had in Kenya. Even the head of state there, the Honorable or His Excellency President William Ruto, Dr. William Ruto, saying that there will be no handshake. And when we talk about handshake, you and I know what that means. It is, bringing in the considered losers of the past election into government. And it has been even termed as the nusu mkate, half a loaf of bread. And that is actually insinuating that the winner wants to take it all, and they're not ready to share the bread. How does this sit with you? And because you are part of the ruling party today, is this something that can happen in Kenya? Consensus politics, power sharing, are these models that we are coming to see more in democracies like Kenya? Is this what we should expect?
No. What I think I want to stand an exit point that this attitude of winner takes it all. And you know very well, my brother, the winner takes it all attitude has affected many countries in Africa, because the way we normally govern, even during the period, you know, some countries in some instances have other occasion where, how can I put it, where they have had a location where there have been other power sharing deal. Even here in Kenya, it has happened twice. It happened after post-election violence in 2008. There was a grand coalition government that is power sharing in 2018, 2024. There was about what we call handshake and some pressed with your grasp of current affairs that is happening in Kenya. So I agree this power sharing phenomenon is new in Africa. We did see also in Zimbabwe at some point. A number of African countries are embracing. But I don't think it is good for the picture of democracy in Africa. What we should need to build in Africa is to build institutions like electoral commissions that have the integrity, the transparency, so that each winner is declared to be the president. But if you have occasions where we don't respect the coverage, or where people, the respect of votes, you know, in Kenya, we call what we call, even in Africa and across the world, what we call the vote counts. So this consensus and power sharing is new in Africa. But in my own opinion, we discourage politics and democratic. It reverses the rules of democracy. What we should encourage is the trust in the electoral process, so that the right winner is being. I know there's a common saying in Kenya that who matters is not only as the vote, but who counts. So from where I said, I think the issue of consensus and power sharing should be discouraged. It is not good for democracy in Africa.
Interesting that you say that, and I want us to move this conversation forward. And I know, Dr. Habineza, you wanted to say something, but I want to just read quickly some feedback that is coming through as we speak. You can definitely share your thoughts from what you're hearing from our panelists here. What is your take on the topic of discussion tonight? I have Alice Chusa, who's on our live stream on YouTube, and he says, question to Honorable Habineza, how does one ensure checks and balance in a consensual democracy? Democracy is about competition, not confrontational, though, of ideas and ideals. And then
I didn't get the second part of your question. Can I say something on checks and balances?
Yes, go ahead, and then we bring in Dr. Habineza to respond.
In fact, in Kenya, when there was a grand coalition government and when there was Musumkate government or handshake government, there was no opposition. In fact, if we continue encouraging power sharing and deals for power sharing or handshake or any form, you know, every country has a way of putting it. If we encourage Nusumkate or handshake or power sharing deals in Africa, we will be killing the opposition. And when you kill opposition, there is no checks and balances against the government. And that is why the president of Kenya, Dr. William Ruto, has been insisting that we must create the office of official opposition leader, so that they have instruments to check the excesses of state. But when now you bring opposition into government and do a power sharing deal, you are essentially killing the power of checks and balances and killing opposition by.
Right. Interesting that you say that. But I want us to move the conversation forward on the issue of term limits, because it has also come out as an issue of, where people say that where countries and leaders do not have term limits, or when term limits are extended or reduced, then it signals authoritarianism, it signals lack of democracy. And I want us to hear from Dr. Habineza, because you wanted to mention something earlier on, but I want to hear your thoughts on this, because
but if that's me a question on checks and balances?
Yes, checks and balances with a consensual kind of democracy, whether it allows for checks and balances, like Senator Cherengei said.
It does, because this comes from the spirit of the Constitution. Article 62 of the Rwandan Constitution mentions how this power sharing is done. First of all, it says that the one who wins, like Dr. Murphy said, the one who wins the presidency or was the majority seats in parliament cannot have the Speaker of Parliament. So definitely the Speaker of Parliament must come from another party. And this is the case in our parliament today. The Speaker of Parliament comes from another party, even though her party does not have the majority in parliament. So that's laid up in the Constitution. Then it mentions that the President of the Republic cannot have more than 50% seats in cabinet, that he chooses the rest of ministers from parliament, from the parties represented in parliament and other independents. So all these are chances that allow for that power sharing to happen. So what happens now, when we are in parliament, we are all free to give out all our opinions. And I think we have demonstrated, when we entered the parliament, people were saying, oh, you're going to stop being opposition, you are not going to be able to speak anything because you're in parliament. But we proved that that was not right. Because we continued airing our opinions, we continued criticizing the government, either both in parliament or outside the parliament or in the media. And we have been seeing changes, and the government has been receptive, hearing these comments, not being annoyed of what we are saying, but hearing the content and observing it and correcting what was wrong. And this is the checks and balances. So we have been able to make things happen in this country. So the bad thing would be that if you tell the government and the government does not listen, but if you check the government and listens, we have other institutions in the place, like in Parliament, we have a parliamentary committee on public accounts. The PAC, I think you have been hearing what has been going on. They have been calling on all ministers, different departments, coming to Parliament to explain how they have used or misused government resources, and it has been reported in the media, and the media has been playing a big role to make this aired out to the public. And something very special, when the public hearings are happening, the Rwanda Investigation Bureau is there recording. The Public Prosecution Authority is there recording. So most times, cases are made from there. From the parliament you go to, you can end up in the court here. And we have seen this happening, people being dropped from cabinet or losing their jobs and even in prison. So this is what we call checks and balances. So it's happening, it happens, but it has to be the will of those people who are doing the democracy to do this. And I think we all have the will to do that. So that was the first question. Then you're talking about term limits?
Term limits.
Can you say it again?
Now, if we talk about, let's say, term limits, it has come out as one of the yardsticks of deciding whether there is democracy in a country where a leader, has longer, stays in power for longer, or doesn't stay longer in power. I want to hear your thoughts on this, because during the time here in Rwanda in 2015, if I'm not wrong, the constitution was amended through a referendum process. The parliament actually also endorsed this, and it changed the term limits here in Rwanda for the president from, I think it was from 7 to 2 5-year terms. Starting 2024. If actually for me, I think I carry this as rumors, because the president of the country I did not hear him say it. But what I saw from media reports is that he will be standing in 2024. That has been picked by various media houses as something to show that.
No, it's not rumors. It's correct. The president had an interview with Jean Afrique. And the interview was not a fake. Jean Afrique is a respected newspaper, and it was republished in the national media. So it's correct. The president said he will stand. But
your thoughts on that?
Back to what you said in 2015, you forgot to mention one important key.
You opposed that.
That we opposed that, and we petitioned government up to the Supreme Court. We challenged, we put our case that we didn't want the constitution to be changed. The issue was lifting up the term limits and having no term limits at all. That was the issue. People wanted to have open term limits like in other countries. The president could stand as long as he wants. So we said, no, that was not correct.
So if it's true,
so we opposed that. We opposed that, and finally we were able to have that article maintained, that the term limits were maintained, though the president was given a chance to stand for another 7-year term and 2 more terms of 5 years, which will start next year. So at least our debate, our point was heard, even though we lost the case in the constitution, because we did not want it. Did some aspects we lost. We won some parts.
So you're ready to face him in 2024 if you were to stand?
Now, about term limits, I have to say what I said again, because we still believe in the same spirit. We, as the party, the Democratic Party of Rwanda, we do not agree in the changing of the term limits. We believe that leaders should work at least for 2 terms. And then they go. We think that's the best, that after 2 terms, it's 10 years or whatever terms you have, you can let others come. Then if you have not done something, the one who follows you will do that. So we think that's the best way to. So if the leaders overstay in power, like one leader said that the problem of African leaders is overstaying in power, though that leader forgot what he said. So that's the real problem. If they overstay in power, they do the good things they have done.
Right. Dr. Mrefu, should it matter how long a leader stays if, let's say, they are performing, if, let's say, the population who actually the Constitution gives power to decide have actually gone through the regular processes and have approved that they can stay for a certain number of time? Is that wrong? Does it signify lack of democracy in that country?
I want to, before I forget...
Just real quick, because we also don't have time.
To say one thing, that research shows that diverse societies have not been performing very well in terms of democracy than monoethnic societies or nations.
Break that down, real simple language.
So for example, in countries that have different ethnic groups, have not performed very well in open democracy because the democracy, instead of rallying behind ideas, they have
the
ethnic groups. And that has created something that was not intended from the beginning of the understanding of democracy. And then to come back to what you asked, for me, I asked myself, what are the biggest challenges of Africa? One is how to build cohesive societies, how to develop Africa, how to create accountable leadership, transparency, rule of law, those things. And if you ask about whether I'm for or against term limits, I would ask myself on based on the number of African countries that have term limits and have respected them. We have more than, I think, about 20 countries. And when you see average number of years those leaders have stayed in power to change, it is somehow less than 5 years. And then you can ask yourself, what kind of project or program can you implement in less than 5 years and be able to achieve social cohesion, be able to achieve development, be able to achieve all these good things
Dr.
that we talked about.
Let the other one who comes to proceed.
But they have different programs. That's why you will find that you are in for election to the first 2 years in power. You're still figuring out what you're going to implement because you didn't know that you were going to win anyway. Then the last 2 years, you are into the election period, then you don't have time to implement any program.
I want you to hold
and then
that.
you will remain in perpetual failure because then accountability will be counted on your ability to deliver. But you will never have been given enough time.
But if you get a chance of a second term, then you can still deliver the second term.
I think, Senator Cherangay, this is sounding like music to your ears, what is coming from Dr. Mrefu, because he mentions exactly what your argument is from your proposal that you're making to the committee that is actually dealing with the bipartisan talks. You are actually proposing that Kenya changes its term limits, especially presidential term limits, from 5 years to 7 years. And it's actually almost the same argument that Dr. Mrefu is saying. What else? Why do you want the president to have 7 years and not 5 years that we have? Because it's received mixed reactions in Kenya today.
Thank you very much. Because Dr. Mrefu, when I come in Kiswahili, means a tall guy and a wise person. I think Dr. Mrefu there is doing wonderfully well. And I'm also a lawyer. I agree totally. Because in Kenya, we want to change the current term limit from 5 to 7 years. And you are aware, in Kenya, for example, or even when you are running for counties or constituency election. And as we talk today, my brother Anako is that all members of National Assembly, members of Senate, members of County Assembly, governors have requested that I include them in the 7-year term, so that, for example, governors in Kenya, you go for 5-year term. If you seek for re-election, you get another 5 years. So I want to change that to 7 years, or even presidency. For example, in Kenya, as my brother has put it very well there, is that first year after they're elected, you take time to set up your cabinet, to settle in cabinet, government, to realign most of the government to your system. Then at the 5th year, you also go for what we call the go campaign, the campaign period. So in Kenya, if you take 5 years and remove the 2 years, you only have 3 years to do anti-transformation. So what I'm proposing is very simple. Let us have 7 years. If you succeed, you take a re-election for another 7 years, and it becomes 14. And if, for example, if the idea of passes through a constitutional referendum, then the president will now have the way you have done in one, where after when we what we call a referendum, now allowed the president run again in 2025, which is, let's say, President Paul Kagame, the best in 6 time. So what I'm asking is that let's do the years in Kenya. And you know, by the way, finally, the West and people who lecture Africa, democratic and democratic, they know the challenges we are facing in Africa population, and they have never complained for their monarch.
Right.
So why to their election of democratic practices, yet is that the part they should have to do the way of democracy.
Yeah.
Where when I'm talking about the tribes, biggest
I hear you, Senator. I think your point is home, and I think we've heard what you said, and what remains to be seen is how this will be received and how it will either see the day, light of the day or not. Dr. Sarah, because we have just about 2 minutes, I want us to share this as we go. Does this worry you? Is this a conversation that you feel comfortable hearing, especially when it comes to term limits and whether it can be used as a yardstick to judge whether there's democracy or no democracy in countries where this is happening? Just real quick, Dr. Sarah. Oh, we seem, Dr. Sarah, I think we seem to have lost her right there. I'll just quickly take our parting shots. I usually don't like it this way because when the show is starting to become fun is when we're being told we need to go. Just 2 minutes. So Dr. Mrefu, I'll start with you. And then Dr. Sarah, please stay with us. I'll come to you for your thoughts. Just real quick.
So for me, I started from the definition of governance.
Yes.
The ability of the state to deliver services and maintain law and order.
So if a state can do that,
so if all these things have been done, and there are ways to develop, the rest, whether term, no. I'm not for term limits or against term limits. This should be left to people to decide. Because we have countries that are considered democratic that don't have term limits.
Correct.
And they are working. We have countries that have term limits. In the US in 1951, that's when the 22nd Amendment was made, that put the presidential term limits to 2 years. The democracy has been in existence for over 200 years.
Right. Interesting. Dr. Abineza.
I would like to say that it's very important for African leaders to respect term limits. If you have a chance of winning the first term of 5 years and you get a chance for the next 5 years, that's 10 years, it's really enough to implement your program. If you fail to implement your program in 10 years, then you're not good enough. Let others continue. So this should be respected because it will also help to reduce conflicts that we are having, these wars and coup d'etats and so on, and bad governance. So it's also important for African leaders to go back to the core principles of the democracy, making sure that people, there's the government of the people for the people. People should have a chance to participate into this government. In Switzerland, they have direct democracy. We have participative democracy. Whatever forms of, let people get involved. Let there be accountability of the leaders, and let there be service delivery. Because people need to have food on the table. People need to have security. People need to have to schools. People need to have to hospitals. Once all those things, and they need to have freedom of expression. Let the people speak out their views. Don't fear them. And let the journalists, the media work. Once you have all that, then we shall have a better democracy in Africa.
Right. I think we'll have another conversation just on term limits and all that when we come back. Senator Cherengai, I want you to just close for us. If Dr. Sarah, are you back? I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the issue of term limits. Just real quick, Doctor.
Yes, I just conclude is that when you remove the mechanisms for peaceful handover of power and you create a permanent presidency automatically leads state capture. State capture makes institutions non-functional. State capture excludes the people that are not closed power and privilege. Divisions in the country. So let leaders come set up their policies. Even in families, there is no person, even as a family head, who says that I will achieve all that I want to do for my family. Once your children grow up, you start working and getting to your children and your spouse.
Right.
So this mentality of saying a leader has a good program and he should not interrupt it is really nonsensical and a problem for Africa.
Right. Interesting you say that, but then others will argue and we say, we started the conversation talking about the power of the people. The people have gone through the institutions. They've gone through the parliamentary system and it has been approved. It was challenged, for example, here in Rwanda, for instance, challenged by the opposition, by the gentleman seated next to me, and the courts actually made their voice on that. Then we come back and say it is not okay. I mean,
understand that Rwanda has term limits.
Yes, it does have.
Yeah,
yes,
it has term limits.
And his problem is when the term is over, you need to go. That is what he's arguing.
Yeah, for us, we said that...
Right, let's give Senator Cherengai to just give us a closing remark and then we go. Senator Cherengai, just real quick, your closing remarks.
Is that Africa should move away from parliamentary or presidential system. We should ensure hybrid system so that we accommodate the different by accommodate for something about right and interest in a country. If we have an hybrid system of running a government, it will be easier to manage most of these. Finally, is challenge us. We need to build more on institutions.
Senator, we cannot hear you, but it's a bit breaking the sound, but we have to go now. But I want to say thank you for making time, and I think this is a conversation that will continue. They end in these four walls, but it continues on our social media platforms. And of course, it's also interesting that while in Kenya you want to increase the number of years, in Rwanda actually reduced from 7
to 5.
to 5.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see that contrast. But thank you so much, all of you, for making time and being part of the show, and all of you that have been tweeting and talking to us. Asanteni sana. As always, my name is Eugene Anangwe. Good night and good luck. Take care of yourself. Murakoze.